Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome, Summit Racing fans. Today is our first Friday Facebook Live for 2023, and we are joined by a very, very special guest that is going to put another chapter into our Great American Success Stories Facebook Lives that we've been doing. We've been joined in the past by some fantastic, incredible guests. We've had Jay Leno, Don Garlitz, Cletus McFarland. We've had Larry Nance, a number of just absolutely incredible guests. And today we are joined by John Hotchkiss, who is the CEO, president, owner, founder, all these great things of Hotchkiss Sports Suspension. John, welcome today. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's great to see you. How have you been?
Well, Al, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the Summit team. And things are good. We had a very good 22, and we're really excited about 2023.
Excellent. Sounds great. Well, we are going to talk about that and the outlook for you and Hotchkiss Suspension and all kinds of new products and great things going on. But I want to talk a little bit about your background because I do a little bit of research with these, and typically I'll research our guests a little bit. And I learned a lot of really interesting things about you. And one of the things that I love is history of people and the things that they've raced and driven. And John, can you tell us some of the, where did it all start for you? How old were you? When did you know, I am going to do something in the automotive industry? And then obviously you gravitated to the suspension side of the world. But how'd you get started? When did it start?
Well, Al, that's a great question. And thanks for that. Amazingly, ever since I was first memory were loving cars and loving anything to do with speed, how things work, making cars and so on. And it was kind of ironic because my mother was an English major, father, finance guy, and my father didn't get into cars until later in life, and he got in a really big way, and we did a lot together. But growing up, there was nothing about cars in our house at all, except that I just had this burning passion, and my parents said, "What in the world? Where did he come from?" But anyway, I'd drag them to races because I couldn't drive, obviously. And I said, let's go to Orange County International Raceway. Let's go to Riverside. Let's do some car things. Let's build some soapbox derbies, cars, whatever we could. And then lo and behold, my father got into racing and away we went.
That is pretty awesome. What was the first car that you raced, John? What was the very first thing? You mentioned soapbox derby? Was that the beginning of it all, or was there? Well,
this was fun, and they were the cars we made were kind of derivative of soapbox derby cars. Grew up in Pasadena, California, and the neighboring city was San Marino, and there was a big street with a really steep hill, but it wasn't straight at all. It would go down and then turn pretty sharp left. And so we made all kinds of contraptions. One guy made a car from a couple of wine crates, and we'd ride our bicycles, Schwinn Stingrays, to Sears and buy wheels and axles and whatever we could to make these cars more fun. And they were made out of 2x4s, whatever we could find. And so that was the first thing. And then bicycles and motorcycles. Funny enough, Pasadena is a suburb of Los Angeles, but back then there were still vacant lots and there was some space. So we would set up and ride our dirt bikes and vacant lot behind our house, and all the neighbors would do that as well. And so there was always something car. And then to answer your question, the first thing I raced was a motorcycle. It was a RD 350 Yamaha in the local AFM races, which we raced at Riverside and Sonoma, Sears Point, Ontario. It was great. That was 1979. And then I invited my parents to a race, and we're doing a 4-hour race at Ontario Motor Speedway, which had the most incredible 23-turn road course. The track was way ahead of its time. I think it only cost $25 million, but in 1969 or 70, that was some bucks. It was like Indy and pretty much replica of Indy. except I believe the short chutes between the corners were banked. But it had this 23-turn road course that was really fun, and high speed, low speed, medium on a motorcycle was great. My partner fell down and his arm just looked awful. It looked like, well, we won't say it on here, but my parents saw that. Another guy was killed, sadly, and they said, "Hey, we'll help you a little to get into cars." So the way quickly I did is I contacted Skip Barber Racing and did their Formula Ford series. It was based in Lime Rock. And so I went back and forth to Lime Rock and Sebring and Watkins Glen and Mid-Ohio and did that for a few years. And it was just wonderful. I even ended up working for Skip on the cars because I quickly learned how to change gears in the transmissions and do the car maintenance. And so it was Formula Ford to start with.
Awesome. That is great. John, do you currently race anything? Or I know you have some project cars. You've got the beautiful Challenger behind you. What are some of your current rides, and what have you raced over the years?
No, I've oh my gosh, this might take some time, but no, so lucky to like anybody who wants to race, I would drive anything I could, and road racing was my thing, and so raced. Worked and prepared a Porsche 924, which is a D production car in SCCA, Porsche 914, Chevy Camaro. Raced a few races in the Trans Am in 1982 in a Pontiac, tube frame Pontiac that was pretty wild for the time, and Porsche 924 GTR. Raced that at Daytona, and I was always going to the races, just hanging around to see, somehow get a ride, and that worked pretty well. And then lucky break, got some sponsorship and a way in, and raced. Biggest thing was British Formula 3, and I raced in that in 1987 and 88, and the drivers at that time were unbelievable. It was Martin Donnelly and Johnny Herbert and Burton Gasho and Philippe Favre and Roland Ratzenberger. And the list goes on and on of the who's who of Eddie Irvine, of the who's who of motorsports. And so I lived in England for 2.5 years, raced and worked on the cars and raced there, met some great people that I'm still extremely good friends with. And in the meantime, raced, did 5 Daytona 24 hours, finished 5th overall in 1987 in Porsche 962. I helped my father put his race team together in 1985, and they started with the old Creepy Crawly March 83G Porsche powered GTB car, and rented that from Rick Hendrick back, years and years ago, and graduated to. My father bought a 962. I could reverse a bit. He did 5 Le Mans 24 hours, and he and his partner were both in the financial world, and so they worked as hard as they could to support their racing habit. And
that sounds familiar, right, John?
Absolutely. And I mean, they raced in sporadic races in IMSA, always the endurance races from probably 1970 on. And I mean, so many Daytona 24 hours. I can't even remember them all. But the first one was 1980 for me in a Porsche 911 or an RSR Carrera. And the car was great, but then we had a third gear issue and a piece of the synchro chipped off, and that was the year of 935s and all these great cars, and a really big speed differential, especially if you're in a car where I remember coming off the tri-oval and in the night, and because the chips were in the transmission, they would get into the shift forks and so on. So all of a sudden the transmission would shift into neutral. Well, coming off the banks at 160 or whatever it was with 935s and all these super quick cars behind it, going into turn 1 at neutral was just the scariest thing ever. Uh, and but we did okay, and did more races in that car, and then again did 24 hours in a 962, finishing fifth in 1987, and finished fourth at Sebring overall in 1990, and Le Mans did Le Mans 24 hours in 89 in a Spice, which was an English prototype car, and with a hard engine, which was a derivative of the Formula One engine at the time. 4-cylinder, single turbo, with 218 miles an hour, weighed. It's just so light; it was like a feather, and that was before they had the chicane. So it was really the 4-mile long Mulsanne straight, and absolutely incredible, amazing time. And so it was more cars. We built a number of race cars here at the shop, and I mean, I can go on and on about the great driving experiences.
That's awesome, John. So currently, I know that your company just recently introduced some C3 Corvette products, and I believe you've got a Corvette that you built around that. Can you talk about that a bit and some of the new products that you've worked on? You have the Challenger behind you, and I know you got some pretty cool. I'll call them the company cars, but
Absolutely, we do it. And but the thing, people say, well, all this racing, how did you get into the automotive aftermarket? But if you think about it, the one thing, if you put a microphone in front of a race car driver, whether it's NASCAR or road racing, they say, or even drag racing, because if the car doesn't hook up and smokes the tires, then the run is not, it's not successful. And most people have a lot of power, but the handling is the big thing. And I was always fascinated how you have 4 tire contact patches, how that makes grip, and how to get more grip, how to get better handling balance. And that translates directly from racing, because you certainly can't win in a race car if it doesn't handle well. And there's so much more driving now. There's autocross, there's track days, and so on. And so everybody knows when their car is working really well, it's not effortless, but it's much less effort than if the car is understeering or oversteering, or if you're putting a lot of steering input in it, and it's just not doing what you want. But when your car talks to you, if you can feel the front and the rear end, you can feel what tires are doing, then it just becomes incredible, and then you get that big smile.
Yeah, John, you've always your company. So let's talk a little bit. Before you started Hotchkiss, you had a background and worked for, I would say, one of the suspension greats in our industry, Guldstrand, right? Can you tell us about how that was and your time there? And that had to be amazing.
Well, and we'll get back to the C3 and all the new products, because we have some really cool stuff coming. But it was amazing time, and it was a time after I'd lived in England for 2.5 years. I was at that point. Racing is all about sponsorship. Can you get more sponsorship? Can you get more drives, and so on? I'd also graduated from Art Center College of Design in Pasadena with an automotive design and transportation design degree. So I knew in the back of my mind I wanted to be in a product design business, and I wanted to. Goal was to be auto parts and performance parts. I didn't actually know what part of the business I would be in. So I arrived back from England, and with really nothing to race for the following season, '89, but I remember reading about Dave Guldstrand in Culver City, California, and where he was. Al, you won't believe it. It was called Thunder Alley, and it was Traco, the legendary engine builder. Traco was next door. There was a shop next to that originally was Shelby and Lance Reventlow. They had his cars there. So the LA area was just the place for racing, and whether it was Gurney, Doane Spencer, and you can go on and on about the greats of the time. And so to be in this Thunder Alley, it was not, it was tight, it was small, and it was today's race shops. I mean, it wouldn't even compare, but it had the most incredible aura of speed and um, just design and ingenuity. And working for Dick, consummate engineer, racer forever. He raced for Penske. He was great friends with Zora Duntov, uh, and he really gave me. Uh, he didn't have a director of marketing. I wasn't a marketing major, but I had enough graphic design and product design. He said, "Well, I've never hired anybody like you. Let's see what happens." So he gave me his Rolodex, and back then, remember, there was a big round thing with all the cards in it, and oh my gosh, I met Herb Fischel, Art Gould, uh, uh, gosh, I mean, you name it, the people that were part of all of that, and to be with Dick, we went to SEMA in '89. All the years he'd been in business, he'd never been to the SEMA show. He was really nervous to make a lot of product, and he always said, well, "I don't want to fill the pipeline." And so I designed the packaging and catalog for him. In 1990, we went to the SEMA show, and I think somebody from Summit came up to him and said, "Oh, I never knew you had all these parts, and hey, we'd like to buy them." And he turned sheet white and said, "Oh my God, I can't do that." And because he just loved his shop, and he loved innovating, but making the commitment to make a lot of product was not what he wanted to do.
Yeah, it's a big commitment, John, and it's a huge change. Making one of anything is it's certainly not easy, but maybe certain people have a lot more fun doing the prototyping, doing the development, but running a production shop is challenging. And let's talk about Hotchkiss, because you've went from that environment where it probably was a lot more one-off, bespoke type of things, custom suspension, custom race car setup. But now with Hotchkiss, you've always prided yourself on give people everything in a box, give them the whole complete suspension kit. It's all matched together. It works great. Well, let's talk about how did you migrate into that, and how did you found Hotchkiss, and when did it all happen?
Well, in really 1990, end of 91 or 92, I left Dick Guldstrand because there just wasn't an opportunity to move forward. He didn't want to go in the big time parts side, as I talked about, and so we parted great friends, but what I learned from being at Guldstrand, and this was before social media, cell phones were brand new. Fax machine was the form of communication for pretty much everything. But the people on the phone, the customers, were incredible. There was no social media, there was no texting. If you go back into 1989, 1990, if you needed to make a phone call during the day, you were probably at work on work phone or at a gas station. But they'd call and they'd talk and talk. Customers would talk and talk about their cars. And I kind of joked to the guys there. I said, we're like the car psychiatrists, because we would talk, and it's the same with Summit customer service now.
Sure.
They talk about, obviously we're talking suspension at Guldstrand, but they talk about headers and primary lengths and carburetors and CFM and jets and rear ends and paint and on, because they were so excited to talk to somebody about what they were doing. And that passion, that excitement, to this day is what I think keeps all of us really excited about the industry, because the things we make people so happy, and because they love their cars and they want whatever car they have, and especially if it's a classic muscle car, they want it to drive more like a new car or many times better, and they want to have fun with something that's emotional, and that's really what I took away from Guldstrand. I started with one product, actually a G-body suspension, rear suspension. I remember befriending the Grand National Club at the time, and I went out to Las Vegas to a drag race there, and I brought my products, but I didn't have a table, but it didn't really matter. I found a trash can and some wood, and I put it on top of that, and we just I talked to people, and we could make Grand Nationals hook up better, and because guys were getting a lot of horsepower, certainly back then. Kenny Duttweiler was the big name and still a great guy in the V6 world. And so started with G body, and then just the customers just kept asking for more. Then Chevelle A body. Then gosh, we did Caprice. We did 94, really 94, obviously 94, 96 Impala SS. We worked a lot with Chevrolet, and we stretched the wheelbase that half inch to make the rear tire centered in the rear wheel well. And we did trucks and 88 to 98 trucks, and we built some really awesome vehicles. We received one of the first on the West Coast, 93 Camaro, and we made suspension for that. And those were actually, a lot of those were Jim Perkins and Chuck Lombardo and lots of contacts I had made at Guldstrand. And they said, sure, because back then suspension wasn't a big deal. Engine parts were big, but nobody had really pushed on the suspension side. So that was the evolution of this company, just following the customer's leads.
And John, so one of our customers, Dragon Drive, had a question or comment. I think it's pretty funny because anybody who's driven one of these at speed will relate to this. Did you leave the G-body shuffle in the design of your parts for the Grand National? And, I think anybody who's driven a G-body at speed will relate to that because, boy, they do want to walk around a bit. So, John, what was your solution to that? Or did you have a solution to that? Or is that inherent to the triangulated four-link that's in those cars?
It has, obviously, if you leave the stock suspension pickup points the same place, it still has this. But what we did really worked on the stability of the suspension, making sure that the rear axle was as straight in the car where we could, and make sure that there were no binding in the suspension. But really what helped those cars were shock absorber design. And, shocks, when it first started, Bilstein were the things, and Bilstein's an awesome brand. But then we started using Fox, and that was, we can control the damping, control the spring energy much better. And so shock evolution, also front suspension design, and then also sway bar balance, making sure that when you turn into a corner, push, or give it a throttle, and so on, the car doesn't do what you don't want it to do. So to answer your question, we can make this G-body. I drive my Grand National all the time. I love it. And it's our most, I would say it's our most fun car to cruise. And so now a G-body kit is sensational if you use everything that's designed to work together.
Yeah, and that's one of the keys, John. I think that I would say, I really believe that you were one of the pioneers that started to look at that from a holistic approach and say, if I have customers buying control arms, but they're using brand XYZ shock and XYZ spring and this whole combination, you mentioned earlier the tech calls, and I know our sales and tech people can certainly relate to this, but they have 4 manufacturers' parts they're trying to use in the suspension. And then they call you and say, hey, it's not really working the way that I want. And you've got to try to track down what's really the root cause of that. And you started putting everything in a box and making everything match together, and really that whole complete systems approach.
Absolutely, because in racing, we worked so hard on shock development versus spring rate, sway bar rates, and so on, to get roll couples right, and to really get the cars to handle well. And now regular street cars handle so well, and people are used to really nice, informative feedback as you're driving anything, whether it's a minivan, a truck, a car, you name it. And so the want for really good feedback, good suspension is there more than ever. I said, absolutely, because we get calls and said, well, I use somebody's springs and somebody else's shocks and somebody's sway bars or your sway bars. I don't really like it. Well, that all has to work together, because the spring has to be enough rate to keep the car from bottoming out. And then the shock has to have enough damping force to dampen that spring energy. But you don't want to have, let's say you have a certain spring rate where you could have a shock with a lot of compression damping. Well, then it's too high a rate, and you're feeling every little ripple in the road, and it doesn't have the right travel, and so to summarize, everything needs to work together, and that's what we do. We're constantly driving, we're going on cruises, we're doing whatever we can, and we're still, to this day, we're still improving the shocks, we just improved our upper A-arms for Camaro, first gen Camaro. And we added a little more caster, we improved ball joint geometry. And so even though that's a part that has been in production for some time, and we're always saying, okay, how can we make it better? And how can we improve the car so the customers have a better, much better driving experience?
Yeah. John, one of again, another customer in the chat section asked a question, and I think this is kind of a fun one to answer. So how do you know when the sway bar is too big? You've picked the sway bar, and I think it somewhat ties in with what you just talked about with making sure everything's matched together. But it's almost a very similar question of, well, which cam's the right cam, or what's the best cam, or how do you know the cam's too big? Well, it depends.
It really does, and we've had fun because we're one of the only companies that bends their own sway bars, and so we've tried so many different combinations, and we bend 1.5 inch by 250 wall sway bars. It's a major bar, and we've bent for rear or front wheel drive cars. We've bent mammoth bars for the rear because a front wheel drive car obviously does all the steering, the braking, and acceleration through the front tires. So what do you want a front drive car? You want it to be able to rotate, and so that a front drive pulls out of the corner. So you need to get the rear to have a lot of spring rate, a lot of sway bar. That combination obviously wouldn't work for rear drive. But to answer your question, we go for the biggest sway bar we can, and it's all about feel and some math. But it's, at the end of the day, the sway bar can't overpower the suspension. So if you're on a crown of a road, or if there are ripples, or if the concrete has been with saw lines, so for rain and so on, you want to make sure the sway bar doesn't overpower and control the suspension, that it does what it should do. You shouldn't feel a sway bar unless you're turning. And so that with the spring rate, and it's so funny. I remember there was Dick Guldstrand and Herb Adams. I don't think they talked very often, but they had polar opposites to what they were thinking. One was stiff sway bars, soft springs. The other is soft springs, stiffer sway bars. And I mean, you can go on YouTube and everywhere, and still people are talking about that. But it's getting the and a race car is obviously different than a street car. But as shocks, again, goes back to the shock side. As they get more sophisticated, you can do more tuning with that. And so then you don't have to overpower or mask handling issues with too large a sway bar.
John, you mentioned shocks, and I think it's interesting, and I'd love to hear your insight and your history with the advancements in shocks over the last 20 plus years. I remember way back in the day, and kind of like yourself, I started in the drag racing world, and the big deal were 90-10s, 80-20s, 70-30s. That was about the choice that you had. And then adjustable shocks came out, and then doubles came out, then triples came out, and now there's electronic options. So from your perspective, how much difference did the development of shocks? I mean, people now have shock dynos, and they're dynoing shocks to check all the damping curves and everything. I think it's really a fascinating topic. And I've had folks with triple adjustable shocks that are friends, and we're at an event, and they're making like 5 adjustments at once. and I go, hey, you might want to do 1 or 2 and try to make sure that makes the improvement that you want, rather than going all in. And and swinging for the fences. But sometimes I guess you have to do that. But what do you see in shock development how far has it come and where do you see it going?
Well, it's amazing where it's come, and because of racing, that technology has really flowed heavily to street cars. And if you can see, maybe I'll lift my computer up really quickly. We have second generation Ford Lightning customer's truck, and we did a kit for that years ago, and used the state of the art shocks at the time with our sway bar, leaf spring, coil spring package. And that's a cool truck because that supercharged, and V8, it just makes the right noise. There are not that many of them around, but everybody who has ones, I mean, they covet those trucks. They're so cool. But we're now working with JRI, and JRI shocks. Actually, it's right across the parking lot from us.
Oh, wow.
And so I said to Jeff Ryan, JRI, I said, hey, let's take this, what we had for the Lightning, and let's make it even better. And so they dynoed our present shocks, and then said, hey, let's try this, let's try that. And we've been doing ride work on it, and it's substantially better than the state of the art of 10 years ago or less. And that's just because of the sophisticated valving and knowing about what controls the spring rate, what controls the tire. And Ford Lightning has they have aggressive sticky tires, but they also have a big wheel and tire package and heavy. And so that the shock has to not only manage the spring, but it also has to manage the oscillation, the frequency of the big wheel and tire package. So we've taken that and answered a question. This Ford Lightning is a blast to drive and takes it to a whole new level. So in about 3 weeks, we'll have that kit back out with something new. But to answer your question, there's, whether it's Grand National, it's Cuda, Challenger, Charger behind me, Mustang, as long as the aftermarket keeps pushing, keeps wanting better results, we can make these cars and trucks better and better all the time.
John, you mentioned redesigning or taking the Lightning and the kit that you sold years ago and then taking a look at it. And I know from the history and from, part number changes at Summit that is a pretty routine thing that Hotchkiss will do. You mentioned the early F-body control arm that you redesigned it to make the product better. And that is a pretty routine thing for y'all at Hotchkiss, right? I mean, it's a constant evolution of I think it's safe to say you probably don't have many products that are identical to what they were 10 or 15 years ago, that there's constant work and development being done.
We really don't. It is true. And I save a lot of the originals in a box. I'm looking up in the R&D shop, and I can see a trailing arm poking out. That's the original 1302 that we did for Chevelle's. And even that, I mean, that simple connector from, the axle to the chassis, we've redesigned that. We put swivel bushings in it. It's lighter. It's actually a little bit stronger too. But it's true because we're from me down, we're passionate car guys, and we're never satisfied, and we always want the parts that we want to drive, and those are what we'd like to sell. And it's interesting, Al, and I'm sure this is the same with Summit, but when I started, it was all about what is it made out of, and how thick is the material, and what are the bushings, and tell me what the weight of the let's say just trailing arms or A-arms or whatever it was. Customers really want to know, tell me about the product. Well, now they want to know about the product, but more importantly, they want to know the driving experience. What's it going to do for me? How's it going to feel when I'm out in my favorite road? I'm on the Blue Ridge Parkway, or I'm on Pacific Coast Highway in California, or roads in Ohio. What's my experience? And then also, what's the safety factor? Meaning, if I let my teenagers drive my classic car, my Challenger, Camaro, and so on, how's it going to be for them? Are they gonna understand what the car does? Because if you give them a '68 Chevelle that's stock on stock tires, stock brakes, it's a handful, and it's a real responsibility to drive something like that because it's so different than any road car today. So customers want experience. They want to know about safety, and they want to make sure that people riding with them that are going to be safe, and people driving the car are going to be able to handle it and enjoy it.
John, where do you see, in addition to shock technology, where do you see tire technology going? I mean, that in itself is similar to shocks. It's pretty amazing. 10 years ago, we probably at that time, I'm trying to think back to what were tire of the day back then. Probably the BFG Rival was about the standard. There were a little bit of Kumho stuff here and there. But today the choices, and I always think it's interesting to watch the 200 treadwear tire stuff at like the SCCA Solo Nationals. There's always that tire that is the kind of like the best cam or the best sway bar. It's the best tire. And to me, it's always an interesting question because, well, what's the car? What's the prep? What's the surface? What exactly are you doing? But what do you see from the tire side, and how does that impact your business? Does it have a marked effect on you and the questions and the tech that you have to do to support it? Or is really once you get to if you're running a good 200 treadwear tire, is it a pretty consistent thing and it's not another massive variable that you have to deal with?
Well, here's what we're dealing with, Al, because we're really our suspension is bolt on. So we say, hey, you can bolt this on in your driveway, in your garage. You and your and more and more families are doing these modifications themselves. So we have to deal with somebody want to deal with somebody with a car that has even 15-inch steel wheels with BFG TAs, all the way to somebody with 20 or 22s with Kumos or BFGs or Falcons. So we have to really work on getting a package that'll work with both. Now, using BFG TAs and a softer original type radial, our spring rate and our shock damping puts a lot of pressure on those tires, probably more than optimum, but the car handles great. And then really comes alive with a shorter sidewall, more performance tire. So tires have absolutely come a long way. Their brands, there's what do you think? There are 6 brands to make absolutely incredible 200 treadwear tires that are great for autocross, track days, and so on. But what I see happening and with the supply chain issues, and also the off-roading is just taken off, obviously, and overlanding. And so, I mean, ain't everybody from a Subaru Outback to a 4Runner to a Chevy Silverado, whatever, everybody wants the latest off-road tires. And it seems to me that we have a limited supply of road tires, specific performance tires, because the off-road tires are taking up so much production capacity. So I know this year and last year have been harder to get tires, probably harder than ever before. I think it's a little easier now. But the performance car is such a smaller market than the big off-road. I think we have to still keep waving the flag. Hey, we're here. Keep developing great tires.
Yeah.
Exactly. Very, very true. So no, tires like shocks have made leaps and bounds, and made such an incredible difference with what cars will do. I mean, we're running, and I know you are too, in your cars, running tires that were on that should be on supercars and so on.
Yeah.
And with excellent grip and incredible feedback and amazing to drive.
Yeah. I remember, John, when the C4 Corvette first came out, and it was they did a Chevrolet back then did a fantastic job with the marketing of that car. And it was so different and so new. But remember the whole slogan behind that car, 1G on street tires. And everybody went crazy because it had Goodyear Gatorbacks on it, aluminum control arms. I mean, it was so cool. And I remember having, the Car and Driver with that car on the cover and the poster in my room and all that kind of stuff. And you think today and you go, yeah, 1G on street tires, that's my daily driver now, I mean, it's incredible to me. And I'm sure with you and your business, you can absolutely take an early muscle car and with the right combination of suspension products and a good tire, achieve that same level of performance, with what used to be supercar status type stuff.
Oh, 100%. And I remember we were at Willow Springs on the skid pad. It's a 200 foot skid pad. And this years ago, and we built a Chevy C10 truck, short bed for a customer at an LS, no, with an E-Rod in it. And it was an amazing truck. And we worked on the weights and we got it so that it handled so beautifully, and it was great on the big Willow and on the streets of Willow. But we brought it over the skid pad, and immediately we got over 1G with a Chevy C10. And I just remember just standing back and everybody clapping, going, "Wow!" Because you're right, that's a supercar number, and that was a big advertising point so many years ago. And to have a truck that was, this was a farm truck in its earlier life. Having that thing at supercar level was super cool.
That is awesome. John, with your business now, so you are located in the Mooresville area, and you moved it. I don't recall how many years ago it was, but California to Mooresville, and I'm sure that was a heck of a transition for you, and probably interesting to move a business from one side of the country to the other. Can you talk about that a bit? That had to be a heck of a challenge.
It was well, I had hair back then, and that was only 4 years ago. No, it was crazy. My business is 30 years. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. Time has gone by so fast. It's unbelievable. And, but to answer your question, so we started a small shop in 2013 in Mooresville up by the drag strip to do more product development and also to fulfill East Coast customers like Summit and McDonough and so on, and just to see what it was like in a new area, because interestingly enough, a lot of my friends from racing in IMSA and IndyCar had gravitated to Indianapolis, but then they made the move to North Carolina. So there was kind of this magnet of, okay, what's going on down there? From California, I didn't really know. But the small shop was so successful. In 2019, our workers' comp, our costs, everything were going up, and the tough part was employees. And to live in California and to have a great team in the warehouse that was having to spend more and more for housing, and I just said, okay, look, we're going to make this. If we're ever going to do it, we're going to do it now. And we're going to move the whole thing to Mooresville. And so we found a building and we could only rent half of it. And so we moved 26,000 feet into, I can't even remember how many, like 12,000 square feet.
Wow.
And I mean, it was just everything. It was everywhere, but it was 9 tractor trailers, Al. It was, and those were it was the big containers. So what the first thing they did is leave Santa Fe Springs with everything pretty well sorted inside. Then they were put onto a rail car in LA. And then I think they were turned upside down numerous times before they got to North Carolina, because when we opened the doors, no matter how we packed everything, it was just a mess. Oh. And so I hired 11 guys from NASCAR Tech, which is not far from us. Great school combined with UTI. And so they were here, and we went through and I say tried, because a lot of the times there were so many parts all over. We had to get all the drawings and figure out what was what and where it went. It was absolutely nuts. And I'm so glad now, the few years later, that we did it. But only a kind of an entrepreneur that's slightly crazy would do something like that. Because, oh my gosh, it's one thing moving a house, which is really hard anyway, but moving a established business all the way across the country. But we did it, and we have a fantastic crew, and we're right next to Riley Motorsports. That's Bill and Bob Riley, and Bob Riley is probably one of the most recognized race car designers in the country, and he's over 90 years old and still there every day. And the Rileys are the winningest team in the Daytona 24 hour, and we've got Debo Tech next to us that makes all the carbon fiber for C8 Corvettes and C7 before that, and with Billy Boats across the street, and it goes on and who's nearby. And so it's really exciting now.
You know, John, this kind of comes full circle with where you, I'd say, grew up at Guldstrand. So with having that environment with all the shops around you and surrounded by like-minded people, you've moved to the Mooresville area, and it's really interesting how similar and familiar that is for you.
It really is. And in Santa Fe Springs, I started a business in Santa Fe Springs in Southern California because there was so much aerospace technology there. And I mean, there was a powder coater, a plater, machinist, welder. Everything was big machine shops. Everything was so close by. And one by one, they started to move out or become more expensive or just a shadow of what they were before. So you're absolutely, I hadn't really, I mean, I thought about that, but no, now I go over to Raleigh's, or somebody comes by and I remember them from the time I was on the race circuit, and we talk about old times, and it's fun. It's really fun to kind of complete that circle and be amongst a lot of racers, or true racers again.
Yeah, that's awesome. So John, moving the business was a huge challenge. And I know, and until I did a little bit of research on you, I never knew you dealt with this other challenge. And if you don't mind, I'd like to talk. It's a little personal, and I don't want to go somewhere you don't want to go, but you've had a personal challenge in your life too. And I really believe this topic affects a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And it's amazing. So the whole time I've known you, I had no idea you went through this challenge, and to see you not only get through it, but to thrive and continue to do what you love after it's just awesome. So if you could talk a little bit about that, what's the biggest challenge you've had in your life?
Well, this is it. At 49 years old, 49 and a half, I was in great shape, and surfing is when I'm not driving a car, I was at the beach surfing and windsurfing, regular surfing, and now stand-up paddleboarding. Those are my thing. I just love being on the lake here, being in the ocean and surfing waves. And so all of a sudden in the summer of 2008, my toes started to go numb on my right foot, and I had a little bump on my ankle. And this really is a story of everybody. If you have something that you're kind of nervous about, it's something irregular, get it checked. And so doctors would poke at this little bump and had no idea. But by the SEMA show that year, I could hardly walk. And thanks to ibuprofen and just SEMA adrenaline, I was able to walk around the show and be there. A week after that, I was diagnosed with a sarcoma, synovial sarcoma in my ankle, which is really a tumor of the tissue. It had wound around the parts of my foot. I went to all the best hospitals in LA area, and some said we could keep your foot, but it won't work very well. The main thing they said, if you're going to survive, you're going to have a below knee amputation. And I mean, obviously that was super shocking. I wouldn't have minded if it was on my left, because I could still heel and toe and everything with my right foot, but it was my throttle foot. But hey, I just shocking news. I went to UCLA in Santa Monica, which is a sarcoma center, and at Christmas of 2008, I had my leg amputated and foot amputated, and then it took a whole year to really come back. I had a ton of chemo, and I do in-hospital chemo in Santa Monica, and the diagnosis for sarcoma is not great, and the survival rate is not great. So it was a huge shock, but I battled through it, and I had great family and friends support, and a lot of luck. And after a year of chemo and lots of in-hospital stays, and I got to the point where I didn't even I was so unrecognizable. My friends barely could recognize me because I was so swollen from all the steroids and treatments. But slowly things got better and better. And I remember the first time I got back into, actually it was the Challenger. It was my first drive on a manual. And I mean, I'm a driver like so many of you, you get in, you know how to drive. Well, I'd driven an automatic car before that, but because I couldn't feel my right foot, I didn't know where it was. Was it on the throttle? Was it on the brake? Was it in between? So I really had to, and I remember going around the block at Santa Fe Springs and really being truly scared that I couldn't stop because I didn't know where that foot was. I'd also had to learn to walk because, when you get a prosthetic, it's completely different than normal walking, but it all came together. I persisted and learned to walk. I learned to drive manual again. And now I kind of, I can get into anything and drive it. And I just love driving so much. And I was so thrilled to survive this whole thing that I know I do a lot of left foot braking and kind of switch my feet around in more some unconventional way. But hey, we're out driving and surviving.
That's awesome, John. It's so great to hear that story. And I appreciate you sharing that with everybody because cancer is definitely something that impacts everybody. Everyone knows someone or has someone in their life that it impacts. And it's great to see you thriving and it's great to see you doing so well. Speaking of thriving, so what new products does Hotchkiss have? You've been very busy. You got the company moved and everything's situated now. And I know you've had a lot of new products you've been working on.
We have, and we're really excited to when the move to North Carolina allowed us to buy more equipment. And so we have 5 welding stations with MIG and TIG welders. But the cool thing, we have a robotic welder, and that's been making our parts even better. But the addition of Haas CNC machines has allowed us to machine all of our products in-house and better. And then we have new hood pins, improvement of the ones we've had. We have many more billet sway bar brackets, and I'll just tell you the small stuff before the big stuff. Shift knobs, and we'll have more and more billet accessories. But the cool thing is that we've not only with the improvements to the other Camaro and other parts, we're doing C3 Corvettes. And I've always wanted to do that, but the timing just wasn't right. But I was talking to Bob Riley, and he years and years ago he developed a package for C3s, and as the brilliant engineer he is, he designed made 25, and then got bored with it and said, "Okay, that's it. I'm on to the next thing." So we've talked about his ideas, and then freshened that up and worked with our own engineering team, and we did fully scan C3 Corvette, and now our solution is a full link suspension, really 5 links, 2 lower, 2 going forward, and then using the axle as well. And so we take the leaf spring off the rear. We put a adjustable sway bar in the rear, our link rear suspension. Front, we revised the geometry, A-arms. We're working with typical steering gear, steering, which we talked about when I was at Summit, and also rack and pinion. And so we're just starting the testing of these products. We had them at SEMA, did a little driving, and now we're full speed ahead and to offer this kit in the spring. But I love Corvettes, and they really don't handle very well. And but taking a whole fresh approach to the suspension is really fun. And we're doing our own uprights. We're doing our own stub axle, drive axles, and working with JRI on coilovers for the kit. And it's been just a blast to do this.
That's excellent, John.
Actually, I think I can turn the computer, and there's the car right there.
There we go. Nice.
Yeah. 72, and it's just back in for more shock work, and then we're back out driving it again.
Awesome. Excellent. So, John, outside of Hotchkiss, I know that you've been involved pretty actively with SEMA and PRI. And can you tell us about your efforts there and some of the efforts with the pack?
Well, when I recovered from cancer and I was back, and I'm proud to say I never missed the SEMA show. So all that chemo, and I was able to get back to the 2009 SEMA show. But at that point, I'd been in the business long enough. I said, hey, I really would like to give back, and I'd like to help our industry and spend some time and just see what the opportunities are for us in DC, and what the really the pitfalls and the dangers. And it's really regulation and green, like the Green New Deal or whatever it is. Our industry could be legislated out pretty easily by somebody saying, well, we just won't have gasoline powered cars, or cars that don't have LiDAR or radar or some kind of navigation. You can't do that, or cars can't be modified, or you can go on and on the list of everything. Yeah. And the RPM Act about race cars, street cars becoming race cars is certainly on everybody's mind. So anyway, I ran for the SEMA board and completed 2 terms on the SEMA board and loved every second of that. And we did a lot of good work. And then from there, I was also on the board of the SEMA PAC, the Political Action Committee. And that is it's vital that we support the SEMA PAC, because the SEMA PAC then gives money to the lawmakers in DC so that they'll notice us, so that they'll vote the right way, or certainly not vote the wrong way, and will support the industry as we need it. There's so many people that are car people in DC, and I've had the opportunity of spending a lot of time on Capitol Hill, going to the different lawmakers' offices, talking to them about that, and they have cars in their garage and car collections, and they're gun or car owners, and kind of people who just love the USA and freedom to modify and drive. And so we bring these things up, and they say, oh boy, yes, no, we need to help you. We need to protect that. So that's been a big, I did 3 years on the SEMA PAC board and SEMA PAC chair, and just termed off in November. But that's something that we, as we go on and on, especially with electrification and so on, we have to make sure that our classic cars will be able to be driven along with new state-of-the-art cars, and that we have freedom to get in our Grand National or our Cuda or Ford Lightning or whatever it is, and get out there and drive, and forever, not just a couple of years from now.
Yeah, I agree with you, John, 100%. And if you want your voice to be heard, that PAC, the SEMA PAC, is definitely an opportunity for you to become part of a larger organization and a larger movement and a larger effort to let people in DC know that we've really got to have the ability to do what we do. Because I think in some cases there's a misconception that the only thing you can do to modify a vehicle is going to be to take it out of compliance, whether it's FMVSS compliance or name the compliant part of a vehicle. And in reality, our industry and your suspension kits make vehicles handle better and make them more efficient. And we sell a lot of components that make vehicles more efficient and run better and keep them in a good state of tune. It's not, I would say our industry, maybe there's a misconception that it's modifying vehicles not for all the right reasons. And it's not necessarily that there's a different direction that we want to take than what some legislators' goals might be for protecting the environment, things like that. So I think what you said about the PAC, though, it is very important for people to understand that. It's very important to get involved. If you're going to ask a question or maybe even more importantly, if you're going to complain about a topic, you need to be involved in it. Because if you're not involved, then complaining really doesn't do you any good. You got to get involved, and you got to let people know what your thoughts are. So
absolutely, Alan, there's the SEMA individual membership and PRI individual membership, because PRI also has its own pack. So whether you give to the pack, become pack approved, and that's an interesting process. Companies can't give to the pack. Individual members are what makes a pack happen, but companies need to support this, obviously, and need to give time for their team members to be involved. There's an opportunity for SEMA members and as well as PRI to go to DC once every other year and to march through the halls of the Capitol and to see the lawmakers, legislators of your district. So here in North Carolina, we see Ted Budd or Patrick McHenry and others, and so you can get an audience courtesy of SEMA with your lawmakers and let them know what you think. And so that's been really powerful to do that. And I hope that in years to come that there's more and more participation in that, because what a great way to hear what your lawmakers think, and also for all of us to get the importance, and not only of the fact that we need to modify and freedom to drive, but the SEMA and the performance companies, the racing companies, you put them all together, it's the largest group of employment and taxes and so on. So we have a voice. We just have to keep on screaming about it.
Yeah, no doubt about that, John. So, John, what is next for Hotchkiss? Where do you see the company going, and where do you see the future?
Well, it's pretty interesting. We see the future. I heard somebody say the other day, our future is backwards, and so, but that's a good thing, because I think there are more and more opportunities to make other cars handle. Give you an example. We're selling a lot of 65 to 66 Galaxy suspension products.
Huh.
And who knew a big, huge Galaxy would be such a popular car? Well, we worked with Jay Leno. Jay called me and said, "Hey, I need my Galaxy to handle like the new Camaro," because my father had one that this is a great story. His father was a salesman and would drive wanted a big car to drive, and Jay checked off. I think it was no radio, no muffler, no sound deadening, and just the wrong kind of car to commute in. But Jay had a blast with it, but crashed it. And so we wanted to duplicate a car replicate a car his father had. So he got a Roush 7-liter engine in it and T56 transmission, and I think it was a Curry rear end, and all the great mods, and we did the suspension. And so he really obviously Jay can do that, but he really awakened a Galaxy crowd that is super passionate about their cars. So I think whether it's the 88 to 98 trucks that are Chevy trucks that are there, older Fords, third generation Camaros. We're working on new Fox body parts right now, and it's interesting. We had full kits for Fox body and third generation Camaros back when they were popular, and as you know, at Summit, then they really took really a nosedive in popularity. They just weren't what they were, and now they're roaring back. Remember, in Texas, we saw that third generation F-body row of cars, and there were a lot of them. So I think that as maybe and when I say this, people are say, you can't say that. But I do think that there'll be a lot of people in cities that will be driving electric cars, and not cars, just products. You get in it, you push the button, and you drive to work or you drive wherever you do. But in your garage, I think, and I hope, will be this great car that you remember, whether it's it could be a Pinto or a Gremlin or a Mustang, whatever it is. And I think our platform will broaden because more people will like even more cars. Some of the cars that are popular now were certainly not popular 10, 15 years ago at all. You'd say, why would somebody modify that? So I think there'll be more of those, but I really believe there'll be, whether it's BMW, Porsche, domestic, Ford, Chevy, Mopar, they'll have these cool cars in their garage so that they can drive every once in a while, because the cars you drive every day are just not, you're not passionate about it. It's really just
They'll
something.
be just utilitarian, right, John?
Exactly.
Get in the appliance and go from A to B, where I think our industry is really built around an awesome driving experience and having something that you love and that brings back memories that you have from maybe owning it many years ago, or maybe just having a vehicle that's like what you wanted back in the day,
Absolutely. So Al, I was driving a 71 Camaro, and it's cool. It's had great Forge line wheels on it, and it's BMW Calypso red, so it's a really awesome color. And I was driving, and these guys were in a G-Wagon, modified G-Wagon, really expensive Mercedes SUV, and this was in Southern California not long ago, before I shipped it here to North Carolina. Anyway, they slowed down, and they all got out. It would look like a bunch of clown car because there were so many guys in it, but they were sticking their head out, and they were honking and putting their thumbs up. And then one guy yelled, "What is it?" And so here were these guys in this, $250,000 plus G-Wagon asking what the Camaro was, but they were just entranced by it. So I think that as long as we as an industry really keep the excitement going and build great cars and so on, I think we can get people to have cars like the 71 Camaro in their garage that they have no past history, they don't know, but it's such a cool art piece. It's such a cool statement that they'll buy it.
Yeah, no doubt, John. Well, John, I want to thank you. We've run over on time a little bit. I know your time's valuable. I know you got suspension parts to design and do all those kind of wonderful, fun things. John, thank you so much for joining us today. Your history is amazing. You've built an amazing company and an amazing brand, and just can't thank you enough for your time today. So, John, thank you so much.
Well, Al, thank you so much, and thanks to Chip and everybody at Summit. Summit's been our best customer for the entire history of the company, and it's a wonderful place to buy Hotchkiss products. And I can't wait for the next 10 years.
Absolutely. John, have a great weekend. Summit customers and fans, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you giving us your time. Have a great weekend. Go out and enjoy your hot rods.
All right. Thank you.